here tonight to have with us the Senate Republican leader in the state Senate, Tim Canote, and of course, leader of the was it 13? It was the Oregon 13, right? That marched out and uh, sent a message to the Democrats that if you're going to decide that you're going to just try to control your opposition, we will not be controlled. That's basically what happened. Welcome
Yeah,
to the
that's
show.
very, yeah, thank you, Kevin. It's very true. Oregon's 13 did a great job, accomplished a lot in 43 days. And I am still impressed with every member of that group.
Yeah, and I think that uh, there we last time that we talked, I think it was in August. I think we did a little bit of a review of everything that went on and what sort of the post game analysis was because it was just the previous month that you guys had uh, reached the sine die. Um, just to kind of pick up there from where we were, because there's a number of really good issues to talk about. So the fallout from that, of course, has been that they have claimed that everyone who had 10 unexcused absences would be not allowed to run again. And there were several senators who would be up in this cycle, and they would be responsible for, they would have to file, and then, of course, the Secretary of State would make a decision based on her interpretation of the law in enforcing her job, overseeing elections. So whether or not she thought you were qualified, and of course she decided that the ones who filed, you included, right, in her opinion, would not be qualified, and that's when you were able to file a lawsuit and begin to um, challenge that in court on a number of different bases. Could you kind of fill us in on what's been transpiring since then, which senators this is affecting, and what the status is of the lawsuit and what folks need to know about how that's all coming together?
Yes, great. Thank you, Kevin. So, what has happened is the filing opened for Oregon's statewide electeds and a lot of other people as well on September 14th. So, three of us filed that day. So, Senator Linthicum, myself, Senator Boquist filed. And when you file, you're immediately categorized as pending until they qualify you and put essentially yes that you qualified for the ballot.
And
Well,
that's, by the way, that's something that they do with every office, right? All the way up
every
and down the ballot.
yep, everybody. If you go on OrStar and you click on candidate filings for 2024, you can see everybody that's currently filed for whatever office. A lot of judges have filed for their offices because there are a lot of them. And so the Secretary of State had said previous that sometime in, I think, late August, that she was going to have a rule that we could not run if and have ballot access if we had 10 unexcused absences or more, which 10 of the 13 do. And 7 or 8 of those are up for election. And so she took about a week and then sent us a letter saying that we are disqualified and will not be on the 2024 ballot. Well, we had already filed legal action, and we have just today learned that the Court of Appeals has voted to certify the case to the Supreme Court. In other words, to move it as fast as possible. So we're hoping the next step is that the Supreme Court needs to vote to take up the case. And if they do that, we could get a ruling early next year. And the filing deadline, I think, is like March 12th. So that would give us plenty of time. And the suit essentially is that the people of Oregon did, in fact, pass Measure 113. And what Measure 113 says is that you can't essentially run in the election following your current term when it's completed. So our current terms are completed in January of 2025. The next election, so the election after that, is 2028, not 2024. That election is over before our terms have been completed. So the plain language, the plain text clearly said something different than what the special interests and the Democrats wanted to say. And so we're just asking the court, interpret the words on the page, because words do mean thing in our Constitution. So that's where we're at right now, and we're raising money to make sure that we can fund the lawsuit. And if we're successful with that lawsuit, that'll give ballot access to, again, I think this cycle, about 7 people who otherwise wouldn't have ballot access under the Secretary of State's interpretation of the Measure 113.
And so the Secretary of State obviously is not the final say. It sounds like, so is it because of a certain kind of jurisdiction? Why does it go from the appeals court straight to the state Supreme Court? Is that some special role the state Supreme Court plays in elections, or is that just the appeals court punting to the Supreme Court, or how does that work?
Well, it's the appeals court wanting to, I think, get it done as soon as possible. Normally,
Oh, it's to expedite it to final
Yeah.
decision. Oh, got it.
so normally you would start in circuit court, and then you'd go to the Court of Appeals, and then you go to the Supreme Court. In a case where you're challenging a essentially a rule by the executive branch, you can go straight to the Court of Appeals, which we have, and they've said and agreed that this needs to go to the Supreme Court post haste. So we hope that the Supreme Court says we need to take this up. So on this Friday, the arguments, or the briefs as they were, will be due to the Court of Appeals. And so those, I think, will become public, and our attorney is pretty confident that we're going to have the better arguments and the legally interpreted arguments by the Supreme Court. And so we think precedent is on our side, and we're going to continue to work this and try to make sure that our members have ballot access under the constitutional provision that was passed.
So one of the principles, obviously, behind this is that of the challenge. One of them is the plain language of what was passed in Measure 113, which it sounds like they're trying to argue that people knew what they really meant, even though you just described the exact language, which makes it sound like that people thought they might be voting to have the election after you've completed your term be the one that you wouldn't be eligible for, which by the way, that's not the only basis you're challenging it, right? There's others, but that one right there already seems to be like, how does a court come to believe that it knows what voters thought when it's not the same as what voters were told the thing that they were voting on said?
Yeah, I think the voters were given mixed messages. The biggest message that they were given was by the unions, who were the purveyor of this particular ballot measure, because they want to get rid of Republicans and control the entire state and the agenda, because they want their union legislation to be put in law without any opposition. And clearly we were opposed to many of the things that the unions wanted. And we're one of 4 states that has a quorum, a supermajority for a quorum. I know ours happens to be 2/3.
And they did get rid of that, right? They didn't get rid of that with Measure 113. They imposed this additional.
They imposed a penalty, as it were, for not being on the floor. And so, to be clear, we were there. We were doing our jobs. Somebody said, "Well, you weren't there." I beg to differ. We were there every day. Where we weren't is on the Senate floor when the time came for the Senate sessions called by President Rob Wagner, because they wanted to continue to violate the Senate rules and violate the law on again, on reading ease, which is in law. And we were very clear that they had to fix that. And they said they didn't want to follow the law. And 43 days later, they decided they would. So, I mean, that is the essence. And a lot of other things happened, obviously. In the meantime, lots of bills died, lots of bills got modified, lots of bills passed, budgets passed. So we believe that it's, it was important. It was an important principle to stand up for the rule of law and to make sure that the Democrats knew they couldn't just do anything they wanted, because that's essentially anarchy. We're going to do whatever we want because, we have the votes, despite what the law says. And we're just like, that is incredibly dangerous. And, we've heard that from lots of dictators who have come to power. And we wanted to make sure we were challenging that in Oregon. And we did. We are. And I believe we'd do it again. I haven't heard any of our members say, I wouldn't do that again. I think they would, because I think
Yes. You're combating the tyranny of the majority, which is a mysterious term to people who thought we are a pure democracy, and we are not. We are a constitutional structure of government that has limits, and and that's the whole reason, right? Why there was the quorum requirement, which still exists, was to mitigate the possibility that a very authoritarian tyranny of a majority could simply do whatever they wanted and abuse the rights of the minority, which one of them is to deprive a quorum. And as you said, you were there. Anybody who went to the Capitol could have found you at your offices, working away, talking to constituents, receiving information from them, doing meetings.
And they did. I mean, literally, we took meetings in the Capitol. We went to committee meetings. We did press interviews, met with constituents. We did all the things that we would normally do. And that has not been true in previous walkouts. In previous walkouts, both Republican and Democrat, they were essentially fleeing Salem, and in many cases the state, to try to make sure that a quorum wasn't provided. We just happened to understand that the state police, who have been threatened to been used in the past to bring us back, we came to the conclusion that they couldn't legally do that, and they were aware that they couldn't do that, and therefore we felt important that we defended with this action the effort in the building. And so it was, I think, very different from other walkouts. I've typically called it a walk-in. I think that might bother the Democrats a little bit.
They like sit-ins. They always like sit-ins.
Yeah, but we also have called it a work action, which they typically have used those words when they want to strike or what have you, put pressure on companies or the states or whatever. So we did use some of their language so they would understand what it was all about. But
it was a strike. That's what it was. It was a strike on behalf of the people in your districts, and they should understand that. Sure.
Yeah. So what else do you do? That's my question to everyone. What else do you do when the group that's in the majority decides that they don't want to follow the Senate rule, and they were clearly violating it, like not even close, clearly violating it, clearly violating Oregon law, no doubt.
Absolutely. Yeah, with the summaries, the bill summaries. Yeah.
The bill summaries, absolutely no doubt. And with that and some of the bills that they were bringing forward, clearly provisions that were unconstitutional. And their answer was, well, when we pass the bills, they become legal. I'm like, what? Still violates the law, even if there's not a penalty for it. And as it relates to constitutional provisions, they were just like, well, if it's unconstitutional, then the courts will deal with it. Understand that then you, the citizens, have to go out and spend millions of dollars and years to get your rights back. You know,
Yeah.
your parental rights, your Second Amendment rights, what have you. And we just were not willing to allow parents or the vast majority of gun owners to have their rights violated by that group just because just because they had the votes. And there have been provisions that were in those bills that have been ruled unconstitutional multiple times in different states. They didn't care. They don't care. Their whole goal is to try to put pressure on people who want to defend themselves and their family and their community, and make their life miserable in doing so, because they are essentially afraid of an inanimate object, that being a gun. And we all know that the intent behind what somebody does with that gun is the difference between something that is safe and legal and something that is incredibly evil. And we've seen evil in the state as it relates to people who have committed murder with firearms. We've also seen people very courageously defend themselves and their families when law enforcement wasn't there to defend them. You know, maybe they showed up later, but minutes matter.
Yeah.
When somebody decides they have evil intent. And so, you know, we believe in the power of the people and their constitutional rights, and we thought that was worth defending. So on a lot of these issues, we just consider them foundational and constitutional.
Well, and so there's two other things that I think of with this too is, and I don't know if this is part of the legal case, or if, don't you take an oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the US and the state? So I don't know if that has force of law, but it seems to be pretty important.
Mhm.
And they, by voting for something that you believe to be unconstitutional, or being, sorry, I should say, being forced to allow a vote on something that you believe to be unconstitutional, they were trying to force you to violate your oath of office, and they were violating theirs in the same breath. You were actually saving them from violating their oath of office. Is that part of the legal case? I know it's a very important principle, and it's one that we should actually mean oaths when we take them, right?
Yeah. So Kevin, we would agree with that statement. In this particular case, that isn't an issue. That would be an issue in the federal case.
Mm,
We would like to bring, because we want to bring a civil rights case on First Amendment and freedom of expression, and the ability to to essentially get together, and because we were engaging in a peaceful protest
mm,
of, of their unlawful and illegal actions. And I don't know what else we could have done other than just let them do whatever they wanted to do. And of course, that's what they would prefer. But you're right. We did believe to a person that we thought that we would be violating our constitutional oath if we didn't protest in this way and if we allowed their actions to continue. And so, the question is, well, can we do that again? We can. And here's what I would say is, once they ran a majority of the Republicans, 10 Republicans passed 10 unexcused absences, they used to be in a majority and they used to have control. They're still in a majority, but they no longer have control because they have given all 10 of us no real reason to come.
yeah.
any future session. Now, is that what I want? No. I don't even like walkouts. And a lot of people know that I haven't walked out every time. And, there's a reason for that, because there has to be a principle, and there has to be the ability, you basically have to know what it is that you want in order to come back. And, and once you have declared that, you have to abide by that when essentially those issues are met. And so we have just some incredible people that have taken, I think, courageous stands and put themselves at great risk. And I am just impressed, number one, to be their leader. I'm just impressed with all of them. And the ability for them to stick together and defend each other through a very long process. And it's even longer because we are now in a new phase of that, which is the legal phase, to defend them. And I committed to all of our members that I would work to make sure that we did everything we can for them to achieve ballot access in 2024. And I intend to do that.
So we live in an era where it seems like at least one party considers itself eligible to control its opposition, which seems to fly in the face of the principle of the whole country. And in some ways, the provisions in the Oregon Constitution are stronger than the US Constitution, or more wide ranging, right? Such as freedom of speech and expression, the right to keep and bear arms in certainly in your own defense. They do seem to be bent on, and that's what the unions did by putting Measure 113 forward, is they if we could just control our opposition. Now, sometimes they try to do it through legal means, right? Other times they try to do it through intimidation, through shaming, through calling people racist. I mean, there's all kinds of tools that it seems like this is maybe more important than just some bills in the legislature, and even just one court case relating to a provision in the state constitution. It's are we going to just let ourselves be controlled as opposition? Because weren't they kind of banking in the idea that fear of what the consequences could be would cause you guys to do what they thought they would do if the situation were reversed? They'd never want to give up potentially the chance to run for re-election because they're the party of government. That's what they're there for, right?
Well, that's what they want. And so the principle is for them to control every aspect of your lives. That's literally it. So this is allegedly the party of pro-choice. Are they pro-choice on where you get to send your kid to school? They are not. Are they pro-choice as it relates to how you defend yourself? No, they are not. Are they pro-choice on your health care? No, they are not. They want to give you a specific, as it relates to education, they want to give you a specific place where you can go. One size essentially fits all. And when you try to interrupt them and say that you don't think the curriculum is good or you don't like something about it, they don't want to hear it. And the same goes for healthcare. They want to give you essentially one size fits all government-run healthcare. And of course, they want all your money in order to make that happen because they have to raise taxes in a massive way. And so once you control somebody's healthcare and their food and where they live, which that's what they do every session, they try to add more regulation in those areas to try to make sure people live the way they want them to live. There's nothing pro-choice about that. In fact, it really smacks of what we saw in the Eastern Bloc and what they do to their people is they force them to live the way they want to live. They try to take over the private sector, and that's what they're doing. They're trying to take over every area of the private sector. And we believe that we will be much freer if the people get to make those choices. We may not agree with their choices. That's not the point. The point is they have the right to make those choices and should be free to do so. And that is the real difference between the two parties these days, because the Democrats, they do not care for you to be making those choices on your own, because they know you won't pick what they want. And so therefore, they have to rig the system as it relates to education, as it relates to healthcare, to make sure that you only have the choice that they want you to have. And what's happened? What's happened to education? It's gotten more expensive. The results have gone down. What's happened to healthcare? It's gotten more expensive. The results have gone down.
Yeah, and we have less available.
Yeah, exactly. The outcomes are different. Well, so when you add hundreds of thousands of new people and give them so-called insurance or healthcare, and you don't add a lot of new providers, what do you think you're going to get? You're going to get inability to be seen in a timely fashion. And I get that complaint quite a bit from constituents from all over Oregon who say, I can't even see a doctor. So what actually is the point? I mean, when you get put off for 30, 60, 90 days, and it's becoming, we're starting to look a lot more like Canada and United Kingdom as it relates to those issues. And so, I believe we fought a war of independence over the very thing that they now want to impose, which is they wanted to impose taxes without representation. And what are they doing now? They want to impose their will in some cases, with, I think, people not being able to be represented in the way that they want. And so that, as part of the crux of our argument, isn't the best way to determine whether or not the voters want somebody to serve them is to have an election.
The voters.
And allow
maybe
them
they'll
to
decide.
Can't they decide if they don't like that somebody took an action that we took? Well, they can vote to not reelect them. That does happen. And so I think the Democrats are just fearful that the outcome won't be what they want. So they try to change the system. And I would say I think pretty poorly. So whoever wrote their ballot measure didn't do a very good job as it relates to how they worded it. And the campaign did not match the words on the page. And it's not what the politicos out there and the special interests say. It's what the words say. And so we're trying to get the courts to focus just on the words.
Yeah, the plain language should matter. I don't see how a judge can invent a meaning to measure 113 that wasn't contained in the plain language without basically violating the voting rights of every single person in the state. Whether they voted for or against it, they voted based on what they were able to read in front of them. And I don't care what an Oregonian editorial said or a Statesman Journal report or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Because if they can't vote on what's in front of them, then their vote doesn't matter at all.
Yeah, so that's so true. And so one of the questions from online is how many of the bills were deemed illegal? Well, when we discovered the issue, the problem, and it was a Senate Republican office staffer who discovered the actual issue, and we essentially did a survey of bills in the process, and it was something on the order of 98% of all bills did not meet the law. And when we pointed this out to the Democrats, they were just like, well, The first thing they said was, well, when we pass them, it makes them legal, so it's all fine. And we're like, no, it doesn't.
Might makes right.
Exactly. It's like, wow, the ends justify the mean. Very interesting. You're still violating the law and you're still violating Senate rule. So when we made the argument, um, they wouldn't admit that what they were doing was illegal, even though it was blatant, because the law is very specific on what it says as it relates to readability. You can't interpret it any other way than the way it's written. So thank you to Dave Frohnmeyer, Ed Fadley, Hartung, Ted Kulongoski, all sponsors of that bill in 1979.
Yeah.
They knew exactly what they were doing. The record is clear.
And their intent was clear
Their
at the time.
intent, absolutely. I mean, not only are the words clear, their intent was clear on what they wanted. And so for the Democrats to just say, oh, well, we have the votes, so we can do whatever we want. And honestly, that's what our nonpartisan legal counsel told them. I was standing right there when he said that to the Senate president. And I turned to him and I said, seriously, that's your legal advice? I mean, that's appalling. Absolutely appalling. And so, because they just wanted to get going with the session, and that's why we ground it to a halt. It's because it was very clear they couldn't care less about the law or Senate rule. And so, there were so many bills that were not legal at that time. So what happened when we came back is they agreed to create new bill summaries, and our staff wrote a ton of them. And then the professional nonpartisan staff, once they agreed that they would do that, also, wrote them or took some of the Senate Republican office work and made sure that it was as nonpartisan as it could be, which, we appreciate, obviously, that staff. And so there were so every single bill that passed, which is roughly 400 bills, both budget and policy bills, had a new bill summary that was read into the record. It was put into the printed journal. It was so read on the floor, put on, into the Senate Journal, and everybody was well aware of that. So in my mind, and I think everybody else's that was there, that was essentially admission that, in fact, hey, we did violate the law, and we're going to change that. So what happened is Oregon Right to Life sued on the fact that the summary for House Bill 2002 wasn't, in fact, legal.
Because they never fixed that one?
No, they did, but they sued before they fixed it.
Oh, got it.
So, and then they expanded the lawsuit to other bills. And so the issue is, can you do a bill without a correct bill summary? And I tell you, I had Democrats coming up to me on the Senate floor after 2 or 3 days, because we came back with about 15 days left. They took a couple weekends, blah, blah, so maybe we worked 10 of those 15 days. And they came up to me on the Senate floor, multiple people on the Democrat side, and said, you know what? This is actually really cool. This is so understandable. I'm like, maybe that's what the authors of the bill in 1979 had in mind. And that is why, it wasn't written for us, because most of the people who were there were elected, who are staff people. They read so many of these summaries. They know what's going on with the legislature.
Translate it to.
They're essentially insiders. But, somebody walking in off the street ought to be able to read a summary and understand what it actually means.
Well, how else could they show up and
Right.
Testify against it if it's like it meant to just go right over their heads, and their betters are going to decide that this very complex thing is what they need, whether they understand it or not.
It's so true. And so I am hopeful that going forward, that all bills will now be drafted with a legal summary, but staff summary, just right at the top of the bill summary. And we're hoping that they continue to do that because we're going to have problems if that doesn't happen.
So there's a question here in the feed, Senator Canope, that says, are there any conservative judges who know the Constitution and the Bill of Rights currently serving on the state Supreme Court? I mean, my first thought of an answer, because I'm sure you don't want to cast aspersions at the state Supreme Court justices right now, and you got your case in front of them. But I guess we'll find out, right?
Well, here's what I would say. I do not think you would find a Supreme Court justice today that would describe themselves as conservative.
No.
However, I think they would describe themselves as committed to interpreting the constitutional law that exists. And the Supreme Court deals with bills and these cases as it relates to precedent that's been set.
Yeah.
You know, what's the argument from the D's all across the country? Oh, well, the undoing of Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs decision doesn't match precedent. Okay, so if that's what you believe, then when it comes to this, does overturning or does upholding Measure 113, would that violate precedent?
Yeah.
And they've spent decades, I'd say 50 or 60 years, we'd have to go back and like really look, but about dealing with plain language and interpreting things, saying plain language matters. Like that's number one. And if you just go on plain language, it is crystal clear that this penalty does not apply to this election. It applies to the election after our terms are completed. You know, I understand what the Democrats want it to mean, and what they tried to sell people as to what it meant, but it doesn't actually say that, and it should, if that's what they want. So, I mean, it's fascinating. So, somebody's asking about House Bill 2002 and whether it's still in effect. So, House Bill 2002, it was signed into law, and there's still a lawsuit on the summary. I don't know what the courts will do with that. They did correct it, so I'm not sure how they will deal with that issue. But 2002, the only things left in 2002 were what already happens today as it relates to abortion and transgender rights. So there was a mandate to cover transgender for insurance purposes. Insurance companies said, we already do that. So they were telling us, don't go to the wall for us because we're already doing it. And a mandate makes no difference because we're already paying it and we will continue to pay it. So, you know, that was going to be there no matter what. And the same thing with abortion. Abortion was legal in Oregon. What was passed says that abortion is legal in Oregon. Understanding that all Republicans but one in the legislature voted against it. Because we do have a fundamental disagreement about some things. But, you know, one of the main things that was ratified in law was parental consent as it relates to abortion, which was really unclear after Roe v. Wade was undone. And we wanted to make sure that parental rights were defended, protected, and respected. And initially, the Democrats were trying to undo that. And in fact, had said abortion for any reason, any time, and any age. And we said, absolutely not. Parents need to be involved in this decision below a certain age, and that age is 15, in Oregon law on most healthcare issues. And so we were able to win on that. And so the Democrats, they did cave on a lot of these issues that we said that we cared about and were principles for us. And if you go back and look at 2002, it was, let's just say, significantly amended. A lot of the expansion stuff in there was all taken out. And, that, I think that was a victory for parents and people who care about life.
Families, actually, which seems to be something that unfortunately our friends across the aisle don't seem to see that as valuable anymore, because they want to marginalize particularly parents. And um, I on HB 2002, were there were some provisions that related to gender, what they were referring to as gender affirming care, the treatments, the hormones and blockers, and the surgeries. Is that something that did change to some extent? Like, is there now a way for minors to get those things even if their parents don't agree? I don't recall the detail of that.
Yeah, I mean, my recollection is that parents have to be involved at a certain age. And here's what I will tell you too: is as we looked at this issue, it is not a given. Like the process to get any of that significant um, gender changing um, options, you have to go through a significant process, counseling, so on, and multiple tiers. And the numbers that we had uh, from OHSU, there are very few hospitals or clinics who actually do this, and OHSU is probably the most prominent. Gave us the number 12 people, 12 kids annually. Um, and so it is a pretty small number. And I think the number is pretty small because of the process that you have to go through in order to access the change. Now, if it was me, I would prefer that none of that's available until somebody reaches adulthood. So in Oregon, that's 18. But that was, that was not going to pass. And quite frankly, it's not that way before 2002. So, and the courts around the country have been striking down prohibitions on
Mhm.
some of this, the impediments to treatment for transgender. Ultimately, the Supreme Court is going to have to rule on this issue as well. And so I think there's going to be a lot of pain on both sides before this is ultimately determined. And it's going to take the U.S. Supreme Court to make that determination.
Well, speaking of that, there's a federal court. I don't know if you saw the news that struck down the California 10
I,
cartridge capacity
I did.
for,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
which is the same number in Oregon under Measure 114, which is in front of a state circuit court judge in Honey County right now. So it's going to really be interesting because they do just stick unconstitutional stuff in bills, whether they be ones they put in front of the people for a vote or if they try to pass them in the legislature. And maybe this, what you guys did, is the start of saying, you know what, we're not going to just let them run over us and do this. We shouldn't put people, as you said, through years of spending money or engaging in litigation to get their rights back because we said we wouldn't do that in the first place when we took an oath. I wonder if this is going to start a trend across the country. Like, we're not going to allow it in the first place.
Well, that would be nice. And I think that was the Ninth Circuit.
Yeah.
So that ruling should apply to Oregon as well, because Oregon's part of the Ninth Circuit. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the Measure 114 case in Oregon. And, we are hopeful that legal heads and clear heads will prevail as it relates to that. Um, Obviously, that was a very close election by the people of Oregon, um, razor thin. It was it was the metro areas that passed it. I think it passed in 6 or 7 counties of 36 in Oregon.
Yep.
So, we are representing, the counties that, didn't believe in this, and we're representing the constitutional rights of Oregonians and Americans. And although Oregon's Second Amendment, I think it's Article 1, Section 27, I think. As I read it, I think it's a lot stronger actually than the Second Amendment, but it's never been interpreted. That's the weakness, and so we don't know exactly what the courts would say as it relates to that. And we will see. But the U.S. Supreme Court set out a new test on essentially Second Amendment issues, and so it's my hope that that the Democrats who they want to ban all guns. If they have their way, they say they don't, but their actions speak differently. So your actions actually do matter. Just because you say you don't want to do that, your actions actually indicate that you do. And so, the Second Amendment is not for hunting. It was literally there to make sure that the government could not overpower the people and essentially institute a tyranny or dictatorial powers. And so it's there for the citizens to defend themselves. And so therefore it is much more important, I think. And just look at the examples of countries that have been taken over by despots. The first thing that happens on the way to that happening, and essentially the mass slaughter of the people, is they take the right to defend themselves away.
Yeah. They disarm the population, who then is helpless, and then as usual, the only ones who have guns are the government.
It is, and it's literally an irrefutable fact. Over and over again, country by country, you can look at it, you can see what's happened, and we have people say, "Oh, that wouldn't happen in America." I beg to differ. If you look and see what happened during COVID and the seizing of power, and the absolute takeover of the lives of Oregonians and Americans, they literally were telling you if you could go to work, what job you can have, if your company could actually open or not. And what they do, they left all the big companies open and they closed all the small businesses. Really?
Yeah, because they were essential,
Right. Yeah. They told you if you could go to church, when you could go to church, how long you could go to church.
If you could go outside.
Exactly. It was unbelievable how entitled people thought they were to control your life over a virus that, while dangerous to some, and, I'm speaking as someone who is, allegedly one of the most vulnerable, because diabetes is a vulnerability to COVID, asthma is a vulnerability to COVID. I have both of those. So, the idea that somehow, I don't think it's the government's job or that it's someone else's job to protect me. It is my job to protect me, right? I'm the one that needs to do that. And I need to determine the risk. And every citizen should have had that right to do that. They didn't do that. They were happy to control your lives. And they kept that emergency power in place as long as they possibly could before Oregonians and Americans had enough of it. And
Yeah, and
there's
they weren't happy when they had to let go of that power either.
they aren't, and I think they're going to want to try to institute some of that again, and I do hope that Oregonians and Americans will, in fact, say, no, you don't get to control our lives. You don't get to control. I mean, literally in Oregon, the governor unemployed about 400,000 people almost overnight. It's unbelievable. Like that's never happened in Oregon before. And you wonder why people were so upset. People financially were broken. You know, they lost their houses. And I mean, financial ruin lots of times ends up ruining families too.
Yeah.
I mean, just the devastation that happened because of those decisions, just unbelievable. So whenever somebody tells me, oh, that won't happen in, Oregon, or that can't happen in America, it already has. And you don't think that the people that have the high powered, guns, tanks, planes, what have you, won't institute their will on the, the citizens if the citizens aren't doing what they want and they can't defend themselves.
Yeah.
You know, I I wish I believed that. I don't. You know why? Because the evidence shows that people can't be trusted with absolute power, and it doesn't matter which party they're
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, because absolute,
That's the quorum rule, right? I mean, you deprive somebody of absolute power because our system doesn't work when that happens.
yeah, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and it's a truism, and it is, and that's why it's critically important to have balance and to make sure that all voices are heard, being valued, being respected. And that's not what the Democrats wanted to do. They just wanted to institute their version of their national socialist progressive agenda that AOC and all these other people want to have, the George Soros types. That's what they wanted to institute in Oregon, and they didn't like the fact that we found a way to stop them from doing a lot of what they wanted to do. And I thought we chose the only option that we had, and I thought we used it effectively. And I'm hopeful that we don't have to use it again.
And they miscalculated. They didn't think you guys would stand on principle because they may not have. They imposed their like what they would have done. Like, okay, we'll back down, because we see them do that all the time.
It is clear that their strategy was we wouldn't go past 9 days. They kept telling us privately, they're like, you guys won't go past, you won't get to 10. When we went past 10, there are multiple accounts from multiple people of the two leaders of the Senate Democrats going in that caucus room and literally crying. They were crying because they literally had no plan after they drove us past 10 because they didn't think we'd do it. And what they ran into was a lot of principled people in the Senate that said, we're willing to take the risk. Of course, we knew that what the ballot measure actually said, but still, I think everyone would do it again. And some people wanted to stay out longer. I get it, understand that. In the end, my view from the person who called for the walkout, who talked to the caucus and got them to unite around the walkout. And we made sure that Democrats did what they said they wouldn't do, which is follow the law. They followed the law. They followed Senate rule. And they negotiated, which they said they wouldn't do. So I think it was a huge victory for everyone who participated in the walkout. Appreciate the support from everybody.
Well, by the way, there was one more topic I wanted to just ask you about really quick. But how can people donate to support the state Senate lawsuit that you've got, the plaintiffs in that?
Yeah, so they can donate to Oregon's 13 Constitutional Defense Fund. It's a PAC. If you put in the number 13 on Orstar, I think you'll be able to find it. You can also, so the money I'm raising right now in my PAC, and Senator Bonham's doing the same thing. We're donating the vast majority of the money that we raise in our PACs to the Oregon's Constitutional Defense Fund, Oregon's 13 Constitutional Defense Fund, because we believe that it's important to get ballot access for our members.
So it's Oregon's 13, you said, .com?
It's
Yep.
not .com, but well, it might be. But
Yeah, it
if
is.
you go to
I just checked. With Oregon with an S, 13, the number, .com. I'm just sticking it in the feed here. That way people can just jump right in there and show support for what you guys are doing, because we just established tonight that there's actually a lot at stake with this and prevailing.
There really is. Yep.
So the last topic was there was this big revenue forecast, right? I mean, just massive size, and that triggers something called the kicker that's in our Constitution. This kicker has a lot of politics surrounding it, but also I didn't actually know what it required in order for someone to go and the Democrats would love to spend it, right? But they probably won't be able to. Could you just explain a little bit of what happened and then what is in place to stop them, especially when you talk about the Constitution and thresholds that require supermajorities and so on?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief, Kevin, but I do want to give people the history of this. About 1986 or so, Vic and Tia cut a deal, and part of that deal with the unions, amongst other things, was essentially this kicker law. And until 1999, it was a statute. And a young, enterprising Republican from Bend, who I know well because it was me, decided that it should really be in the Constitution because we needed to protect it. Because I'd always hear, so in my freshman term in the House, 1999, I'd always hear these sorry arguments from Democrats. It's like, man, if we could get our hands on that money, I'm like, yeah. And I thought to myself, we're in the majority right now, but if we ever lose the majority, if this is a statute, they're just going to wipe it out with a stroke of a pen. Because if they get into a majority in the legislature, they have the governorship, they control everything. So I was able, an HJR or an SJR, so Senate Joint Resolution or a House Joint Resolution. This happened to be House Joint Resolution 17 in 1999. Doesn't need the governor's signature. And so we referred a constitutional amendment to the ballot, and it was not easy to do. We wrangled all session, even though Republicans were in control, because not every Republican wanted to vote for it, because unfortunately there are Republicans who also want to spend, and so because politicians believe they derive power from how much they can spend and ingratiate themselves to their constituents. And as we know, the end game on that is not well. Margaret Thatcher described it in saying that at some point you run out of other people's money, and you will. And so the kicker was essentially, in my view, a self-imposed spending limit on government. So if you collect more than 2% of what you forecasted that you were going to raise, and that's what the budgets are set on, the forecast, then it goes back to the people. So as the voters took it up in the year 2000 and passed it by a strong majority, somewhere in the 60s, I think 62, 63% of Oregonians voted for it. And I heard John Kitzhaber describe later, he said it was the biggest mistake of his political career not to challenge that with other ballot measures, put other ballot measures on there to see if you could get to vote for something else. But anyway, so voters passed it. And since that time, including this one, which is $5.6 billion returned, it will have returned well over $12 billion of taxpayer funds to the people that paid it in the percentage that they paid it. So you are going to, if you pay state income taxes, you are going to get the largest tax credit that you'll probably honestly ever see. And it's pretty substantial. I think it's roughly about 45% of the taxes that you paid in the previous year you'll get that percentage back as a credit when you file your 23 taxes in 2024. So people ask me, when can I get it? Well, the sooner you file. So as soon as you're able to file in 2024, that's when you can get that credit. We tried to turn it into a check and get it back to you this year, but Democrats didn't want to do that. And so our biggest goal throughout this session was to make sure that money was returned to the people of Oregon, because we believe that you can spend your money better than government can, because you know what your priorities are. And lots of times they aren't the priorities that politicians have. So that's what's going to happen. And I'm glad it's in the Constitution. And I would tell you there are multiple bills this past session to try to change that. And none of them ultimately came to a vote. And I think for good reason, because people like to get their money back.
What do they have to do in the Senate and the House if they wanted to try and take that money? What is the threshold? It's higher than a majority, right?
It is. It's 2/3 vote. So the original bill was 75%. In order to get the votes to pass the bill or the referral, I had to modify it to a 2/3 vote, and because that's where I got the votes to get this to the ballot. And so I could have said, nope, I'm sticking with 75%, and we may have not gotten that to the ballot. And if we hadn't, $12 billion would have been spent by politicians. And so, politics is the art of the possible. And the art of the possible that session was 2/3. And it's still a pretty high bar. 75% would have been impossible to get to, unless there's just an absolute emergency that, something catastrophic would happen.
Right, like an earthquake or something. But yeah, so 20 in the Senate, 3 in the House.
Yeah, something where everybody said, hey, we just have to do this. But there have been a couple of times where the kicker's been kept. The corporate kicker, I think, was kept a couple of times, and then that ended up getting turned into a rainy day fund on the ballot.
Yeah,
got pulled out and put into kind of a rainy day fund situation. So anyway, that is what the kicker looks like, and I am glad you are all getting your money back. And it's like I said, it's going to be the biggest credit you're ever going to see, probably, from your state government.
Senator Knopp, the $5 billion man tonight, reminding us of why you're going to get some money on your taxes back in the state of Oregon in the middle of Biden inflation and rising home costs, healthcare costs, rising taxes in some places, and really growth that can't make up for what's been happening to our incomes. Much needed. So thank you I'm glad that we got to end on that one, because they need to keep fighting the good fight, and they need to know what we've done in the past here and what you've done in order to make this possible. So thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and stories here with us tonight, and keep up the good fight. And we'll make sure people know Oregon's with an S 13.com, and they can go and support your efforts here to fight the tyranny of the majority here in the state of Oregon. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Have a great night.
Yep, you too.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please share the show with everyone you can, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Captive Audience tomorrow night. It should be David and I with more news and opinion you can't get anywhere else. Have a great night.